Welcome to the House Ag and Natural Resources Budget Committee. We only have one small item on the agenda. Wait for the doors to close. Victoria, you just want to stay, you can sit there if you want to. You go up. Nothing. I thought you could just sit right there and do it.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee. So yes, we'll be working on the Kansas Department of Health and Environment Division of Environment's budget today. Those of you that have been on the committee before will know that the white document in front of you contains the budget for the entire Kansas Department of Health and Environment, but this committee will only discuss the Division of Environment. So there's a lot of information on KDHE Health in there, but we will just be discussing the Division of Environment. And the Division of Environment is actually all the way at the back of the document on page 1046. Page 1046 starts with the description of the agency, but since you already had an informational hearing and since Deputy Secretary Henning is here, I'll skip over the description of the agency and go straight into the budget, which is on page 1048. On page 1048, looking at the bottom of the page underneath the box, the agency estimates Division of Environment expenditures for fiscal year 2022 of $159.4 million, including $4.3 million state general fund. This is an all funds increase of $87.6 million and an SGF increase of $216,000 above the fiscal year 2022 approved amount. I'll start with that SGF increase and just do that first bullet. The agency is requesting $225,000 from the state general fund to replace laboratory equipment to test drinking water. The rest of that increase, $87.6 million, is primarily due to increased federal funds, and we'll turn the page to look at that. On page 1049 at the top of the left column, the agency is expecting increased receipt of federal funds for COVID-19 testing. As a reminder, the Division of Environment includes the laboratory, so that lab does the COVID-19 testing, so the agency is expecting increased federal funds for that COVID-19 testing. And still on page 1049, the middle of that left-hand column, the governor recommends fiscal year 2022 Division of Environment expenditures of $201.4 million, including $4.3 million state general fund. This is an increase of $42 million, all from COVID-19 pandemic relief funds, above the agency's revised estimate. The State Finance Council approved $42 million to continue COVID-19 testing, but it approved it after the agency submitted its budget, so it's included in the governor's recommendation, but not in the agency request because it occurred after the agency submitted its budget. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions on fiscal year 2022.
Committee, any questions on 2022? 23, Victoria.
Great. Fiscal year 2023 is still on page 1049, the bottom of that left-hand column. The agency requests 2023 expenditures of $113.1 million, including $4.2 million state general fund. This is an all funds decrease of $46.3 million and an SGF decrease of $107,000 below the division's 2022 revised estimate. That all funds decrease is primarily due to decreased receipt of federal funds. So the agency's request is expecting decreased federal funds for COVID-19 testing in fiscal year 23 compared to fiscal year 22. The agency also has a few enhancement requests at the top of the right-hand column on page 1049. The agency is requesting $230,000 from the state general fund to purchase lab equipment. That second enhancement, drinking water protection program, the agency is requesting $350,000 from the state water plan fund for the drinking water protection program. And that last enhancement, Watershed Restoration and Protection Strategy, or RAPS program. The agency is requesting $296,000 from the State Water Plan Fund for that program. And the governor's recommendation at the bottom of page 1049. The governor recommends 2023 Division of Environment expenditures totaling $178.1 million, including $69.2 million State General Fund. This is an increase of $65 million State General Fund above the agency's fiscal year 2023 request. And that $65 million is due to the governor recommending $65 million State General Fund to construct a new lab on Lot 4 of the Capitol Complex. The State Finance Council approved this plan after the agency had submitted its budget, and the governor is recommending $65 million State General Fund. And just to be absolutely clear, that $65 million is State General Fund. Some of you may be familiar with last year's bill that allowed the agency to bond to build the lab, but this $65 million would allow the agency not to bond and just pay for the lab with that appropriation. Just wanted to be clear about that. And Mr. Chairman, I'll stand for questions on the Division of Environment's budget.
Committee, any questions? Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Victoria, you do a nice job. I appreciate that. And so the little tidbit about the bond, so, yeah, I don't remember that. So, should we pass that?
Sure. So as part of Senate Bill 159, which was the omnibus appropriations bill, there was language allowing the agency to bond $65 million to build the lab on Lot 4. So yes, it was part of last year's omnibus appropriations bill.
So, which I voted no for, surprisingly. So, quick question then, if they've already bonded for it, then what happens?
They hadn't already bonded.
They hadn't.
They just begin, that bill gives them the authority to bond, or
Okay.
gave them the authority to bond.
And now they're just asking directly for the funds.
That's what the governor's recommending. She's
Got it.
recommending the funds.
Okay, awesome. Thanks, Victoria.
Thank you, Victoria. Oh, well, wait a minute.
I'm sorry, the 230,000 for laboratory equipment, will that, I mean, and you may not know, I can ask the agency, but would that likely be for the new lab, or is that going to be just to get them through? I guess I'll ask Leo about that. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Victoria. So, Leo Henning, come on down.
Oh, we have a PowerPoint.
Yeah, you have copies. There should be a PowerPoint. Do you want me to use the PowerPoint or just go through this?
If you've got it going, we'll watch it on the big screen. Okay.
So, good afternoon. While they're pulling that up, I can at least, the button, I think so. How's that? Is that better? Okay. So, good afternoon, Chairman Corbin and the committee members. Again, my name's Leo Henning, Deputy Secretary and Director of Environment at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. And we are here to talk about the Division of Environment's budget. So, since I've been here once before and talked about some of the stuff that I would normally cover, I'm going to go through that very quickly because I'm sure you don't want to hear it again. So, and I'm sure you're probably had enough budget discussions. So.
We're just starting on KDHE. I'm glad you waited.
Yeah. Yep, that's it. I hope it is. Want me to have the clicker, or do you want me to just say, go ahead? I don't have a clicker with me. Okay, I guess. All right. So let's move off of this slide to the next. Again, this is just an overview of the Kansas Department of Health and Environment, three main divisions: public health, environment, and healthcare finance. And again, we're here to talk about environment. Next. So again, here's our mission: protect and improve the health of and environment for all Kansans, and how we accomplish that. Next. The federal requirements that the Division of Environment implements for the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and there's one up there for the Department of Interior. KDHE implements most of the environmental laws in Kansas for the EPA, and you can see the list of them there. Next one. Environment has 6 bureaus in it, and they're listed there. And you can use this as a cheat sheet for the programs that are in the Division of Environment. Next. Bureau of Air. Basically, it regulates air emissions in the state. Next one. Bureau of Environmental Remediation is where our cleanup programs are housed and redevelopment programs. Next ones. Bureau of Waste Management controls how we handle our solid and hazardous waste in the state. Next. Bureau of Field Services, our district offices, our RAPS program, our drinking water protection program, and our feedlot program. Next one. Bureau of Water takes care of our wastewater treatment, our drinking water, and runs a low-interest loan program for municipalities to upgrade their facilities. Next one is Kansas Health and Environmental Laboratories. This is where the municipalities send most of the drinking water samples. And then we also do many health tests there for the local health departments. And right now we are doing lots of COVID testing. And so the next slide, I just want to show you a little bit about the COVID testing that we've performed over the last couple years. Total, we performed 450,000 COVID tests at the lab. You can see the first hump was where COVID started, and then they got a little higher, which was the Delta variant showed up. Then during the summer of last year, the testing dropped off quite a bit. We weren't seeing a lot of COVID testing needs. And coincidentally, that is also when we put our budgets together. And we expected to see a slight increase in fall with COVID testing, because that's just when cold and flu season begins again. And we did see that in September, October. We saw an increase over the summertime. But then the Omicron variant showed up, and that is that large spike at the very end there. And so in that large spike, it's about 68,000 samples run at the lab in 1 month. So it was a lot of work. But what I wanted to point out is when we are forecasting our budgets, we were in that lull period. And so we were not expecting the amount of testing at that time as we had actually had to perform. So next slide. So here's our normal FTE count around the state, shows you where they're located. There's a total of 443 total employees on that map. Most of them are scientists of some type, whether they're engineers, geologists, hydrologists, but they are mostly scientists is our staffing. And I want to say again, this is our normal staffing levels. Next slide. Now I've included this slide to show you what a normal funding source we have within the Division of Environment. As we go through these slides, these next few slides, you're going to see that nothing was normal this year, and our forecast for next year is not normal. So I will try to compare those expenditures for this year and next in the following year to what a normal is. So on this slide, you can see trust funds are about 26 million. Our federal money is about 18 million. SGF's around 4 million. State water plan is 3.2 million, and fee funds are 19 million. I would want to note a couple things about this slide. Last year, in a proviso, $120,000 of SGF was added for the department, for the lab to buy some equipment that we needed badly. And so even last year in the budget, we had identified this as an issue, and through a proviso, that money was added. It was $120,000. But on this, you can see that 90% of KDHE's budget, or Division of Environment's budget, is from trust funds, federal dollars, and fee funds. Very little state general fund and very little state water plan fund. So let's go to what happened in 22. Next one. So you can see trust funds, SGF, state water plan, fee funds all stayed pretty close to our normal. But the federal dollars went from a normal of around 18 million to 146 million. That 146 million is all federal dollars for COVID testing. So some of the things that, well, I shouldn't say all of it, 128 million of that is for COVID testing. So what that COVID testing dollars was used for was to purchase testing equipment out at the lab. Sure, I can use it, I think. No, I can do it. Testing supplies, PPE, things like this. Additional staff, we are now running 24/7 at the lab. So we have 3 shifts going. And then expenses related to mass testing sites, testing equipment and supplies for the health departments, schools, clinics, long-term care facilities, correctional facilities. All those testing supplies and cartridges were purchased through the lab and then distributed out to these different organizations. And we also paid for all the contract labs. So if there were private individuals like Wichita State set up a testing facility for the people around Wichita area, we reimbursed them for their costs also. So although it shows 128 million at the lab, that money was not, most of it was not spent at the lab. It was in contractual services to other entities. So our expenditures, as you can see, commodities, which is the supplies in which we had to purchase for the COVID testing, went up about $46 million. Contractual services, which paid for all that testing at private labs, went up an additional $78.2 million. There was some minor increases in capital outlay and aid to and assistance to locals. And then there was a $3 million increase in salaries and wages, all for lab staff to run tests. 23 is really a placeholder. We don't really know what's going to happen with COVID testing. In January, we were 100% busy with doing COVID testing out there. It's dropped off significantly so far this month. If we hope that it will continue to do that. So the amount of testing we're going to be doing in 23 is somewhat unknown. We don't know if there'll be a new variant that pops up or what, but there are placeholders here for some additional federal dollars to do that testing. And you'll note that in the federal dollars pie of this chart is an additional $41 million. And also, you'll notice on this that there's an additional, the The state general fund is now at 69 million. That reflects the 65 million that was recommended by the governor of SGF for building the lab. So that is 23. Now, on the expenditures, it kind of reflects the same thing. There's a capital improvement project there for the lab for 65 million. There's 3 million there for the staff if we need them for the COVID testing. There's $20 million for COVID commodities testing supplies, and an additional 26 million there for COVID testing and contractual services in case we have to pay for labs again outside of our ability to sample do them here. So it's a best guess right now as to where COVID will take us next year. This is all federal dollars. If the federal dollars don't come, needless to say, we won't be spending them. So that answers where we're all at. So, okay. So this is just a long-term projection of where our funding for the Division of Environment has been. Our expenditures, trust fund, pretty normal, back to where we were several years ago. Our federal dollars and fee funds are pretty flat there in the middle. SGF slightly reducing, and then state water plan is slightly increased. So here's a zooming in on the state general funds. Over time, you can see that back in FY08, we received almost $10 million. But for the last 7-8 years, we've been hovering around that $4 million. So the next is the supplementals for 22, and then the enhancements for 23. These were requested by the Division of Environment, and the governor did recommend them in her budget to increase FY22 SGF by an additional $225,000 to purchase equipment and instruments at the lab for environmental testing. And in FY23, an additional $230,000 again for testing equipment at the lab. And in anticipation of a question, all those instruments that are going to be purchased can go to the new lab, and that would be our intent. And then lastly, the governor recommended full funding for the state water plan, which means a total of $6 million from SGF and $2 million out of the Economic Development Fund. So if that enhancement goes through, or budget governor's recommendation goes through, there would be an additional $350,000 that would go to the Drinking Water Protection Program, and an additional $269,000 to the RAPS program. So this gives you an idea of if the governor's recommendation goes through for the Division of Environment, what those additional funds will be used for. So I know that there's lots of questions about infrastructure federal dollars coming down. So for the Bureau of Water, it appears that we will receive an additional $79.4 million this year. We're looking for that to come to us in the next 30 to 60 days. That money will be used in our state revolving loan fund for both drinking water and wastewater treatment systems at municipalities. Lead line replacements, which is on the drinking water side, and then emergency contaminants on both the wastewater and drinking water side. The estimate is over the 5-year plan for the bipartisan infrastructure deal is that we will receive roughly $460 million over the next 5 years for improving our water infrastructure. So another federal infrastructure funding is for our Bureau of Environmental Remediation. They have the coal mining program, the surface mining program down in southeast Kansas that deals with the old coal strip mining areas of southeast Kansas. dealing with mine shafts and subsidences and then acid mine drainage off of those spoil areas. It looks like for the next 15 years that we can expect an additional $4.7 million a year from the Department of Interior, which would raise their total budget up to $7.5 million a year. Some accomplishments. In 21, KDHE helped the city of Wichita attain funding for their new drinking water treatment system facility. It's a $547 million investment by the city of Wichita. Kansas was able to provide them $254 million of state revolving loan dollars to a low interest loan to the city to pay for about half of the project. Since 2009, KDHE has provided $22 million of loans to water and sewer improvements for municipalities with a population less than 1,000 people. Of that 22 million, 13 of the municipalities received $7.9 million of loan forgiveness. So that's free money to them. They don't have to pay it back, which is a good deal for them. KDHE provided $1.7 million to school districts to replace old diesel engine buses. We also provided $2 million to the Kansas Department of Transportation from the Volkswagen settlement to enhance our electrical charging stations around the state. KDOT is currently, I think, has just received proposals for that and is evaluating that. And we, again, was given authority to build a new laboratory on parking lot 4. So challenges, employee recruitment retention is probably our largest challenge. And I will talk more about that in a minute. With all this new federal funding coming down, and we see it coming, we're going to try and manage that additional workload with existing staff. But I can tell you that will be challenging for us. We are already a little thin with our current staff. So handling all this additional federal dollars coming in and getting those out to our municipalities will be challenging for us. And the other challenge for us is the small town water compliance. It's very hard for the small towns in this state to keep up with all the requirements for safe drinking water. Mostly because they are small towns and they don't have the taxpayer base to make improvements because it's just they don't have the base to do it with. So that is a concern, and we are constantly working with those small communities to try to nudge them in the right direction, but we understand their limitations also. So I'm going to talk a little bit about recruitment and retention. You had asked me to bring some information to this discussion the last time I was here, and I have. It is almost impossible for us to hire a professional engineer at our current salary rates. We have had positions open for months upon months upon months with no applicants. We are able to hire students out of college. Our entrance rate that we pay is comparable to private industry as they just come out of college. But as they gain experience, gain that license and professional status, we are not competitive. And so therefore we tend to lose them. And therefore it does cause hardship within the division to get applications and permits out the door. So I'm going to provide you a graph here to think about as I talk about this. What I asked our HR group to do is say, how many current employees do we currently have as of this date of this graph? And so right now we have 417. So no vacancies are up here. This is just how many people come to work every day. As you can see, 181 of those 417 have been hired within the last 5 years. So we have a very young staff. It's it's like I mentioned, we can hire them out of college, but once they get some experience, we lose about 60% of the people that we hire within the first 5 years of their employment. Last year, we lost 80 people. That is almost 20% of your staff. So in 5 years, there won't be anyone there. Just kidding. But that turnover rate is unsustainable. We are constantly hiring, training, and watching those talented people leave the employment. Most of the time, it is for a better job. When I talk and see their exit interviews, it's almost always for they can do better outside of state pay. But I will mention that out of those 80 that left last year, 15 of them were retirements. So not only are we losing them at the front of this curve, we're also losing them, the more senior people, the more experienced people on the other end of this curve. So it's a situation that I don't know where it's going to end up, but right now it is not very good. So to that end, I would highly recommend that we support the governor's recommendation for a 5% pay increase for state employees. And to that end, I would also recommend that a market study be done for the technical staff that we have so that we can see how we really do compare with the private industries and the states around us and find out if there can be some adjustments made to be more competitive in that job market. I will say that the teleworking has helped. I know that we've been able to retain some employees by allowing them to work from home a couple days a week. But private industry is also doing the same thing, and they're allowing their employees to work from home. So we're maybe holding our own barely on that, but overall, the employment issues in the state are concerning. So you had asked for some information on that. Hopefully I've answered your questions. If you have any other questions, I'm willing to take any questions you may have.
Of course, Mr. Chairman, I want to jump right in here. Thanks, Leo. Let's go back on talking about retention, employees. To me, that's critical. The question is, you suggest a market study. And so how would that progress? Do you have the money in your budget to implement a market study? And when do you see that taking place? Just tell us a little bit about that.
Usually those market studies have to come from the Department of Administration. And the concern that administration has is even if KDHE had the funding to move some salaries up within KDHE, they look at state government across all agencies. So if KDHE raises its salary, then what does that do to the salaries of those same type of professionals in KDOT? So unless there's a lifting of the entire boat, it has to be a statewide initiative. And the study is one thing. We can come up with how much we should be paying, but the second part of it is then you have to come up with the funding to then enact that survey. And that is the part that historically is where the state has not been able to do it. We've done these market surveys previously, found out where we were in relation to the other states and industry, but when it comes to the funding part of it, that is where we've always fallen short. And that's a historical perspective from Leo Henning.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman. Leo, when was the last marketing study completed? Do you know right offhand?
It was the Hayes study. Hang on. Do you guys remember when the Hayes study was? Okay, it's been 20 years probably.
Oh, so we're right up to date. Okay.
Yeah, it's just a few days ago.
Yeah, a few days ago. Okay, I understand the dilemma because of funding, but it would seem to me that's something we ought to do periodically anyway through the Department of Administration, so we have good data that we can rely on. Funding's a different, I understand that, but I think we need that data.
Right, and it's just not KDHE that's having these issues. I mean, KDOT's having the issues with hiring engineers. I know our water office, our Department of Ag with their Division of Water Resources is having, so it's just not a KDHE issue. So it is a statewide issue.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So my question is, just in breaking down, KDHE always seems like a giant, so big. There's so many divisions. So this may even be a Victoria question. I'm just curious to know, in these three divisions, Leo, you're in the environment piece of it. And so your entire budget that you're asking for is the 3.9, 3.6? Is that what you're asking for? That's the 20, what are they asking for in 23?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So they are requesting 113.1 million in fiscal year 2023, and that's on page 1049.
So could you tell me then, the Division of Public Health, Division of Environment, Division of Healthcare, fine, like, I'm just curious to know what each one, do you have each one of those by any chance, or just the environment piece?
I do. So public health for fiscal year 2023 is 215.1 million. Healthcare finance is 3.1 billion with a B. And then the agency also budgets its administration program separately. So that's 35.1 million.
And I'm sorry, one more time on the environment, I didn't write it down.
113.1
Million.
million.
Okay, so to talk about, thank you, Victoria. So Leo, then, are your benefits packages, are they good? Are they comparable? Like, are they, because our benefits packages aren't great, but they're better than $88 a day. So I'm just curious to know what your benefit packages are.
I mean, naturally, we have the state benefits that are offered to all state employees. I wouldn't venture to compare us to private industry because I don't know what all is offered there. But obviously, our employees believe that the benefits at private industry seems to be better than the state, just because of the exodus of employees.
So last question, if I might, Mr. Chair, the biggest budget in our state, would it be KDHE? Is that the big, in terms of the biggest of all the departments in the state? Is KDHE, do y'all have the largest budget?
I don't know. I would ask Victoria if you know who has the
Or
largest
maybe
budget.
education?
I'd have to check. I'm leaning towards education, but let me check.
Okay, thank you. That's all. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
I have to do some quick math, but if I'm doing my quick math correctly, and this is a very general, okay, it would mean for it to be about a $2,500 a year increase. I mean, and I'm truly doing some guessing here, so if. I could have used my calculator.
question I have for you, since you deal with rural water. What are you doing for the people out in western Kansas that say they have uranium in their water and try to help those little towns survive?
Well, as you know, the uranium is naturally occurring. It's coming in from Colorado. So there's not a point source to go after. If it was a company that was releasing this uranium, we would have a clear case against them. But since it's from Mother Nature and it is being transported in from Colorado via the river, there's not a lot we can do on the legal standpoint. For the municipalities that have seen uranium increase in their drinking water, we have provided them a low-interest loan. They have installed the treatment system, and it's my understanding that they have already paid that loan back. So they aggressively paid that down. There may be more municipalities in the area that may have to look at other alternatives for, instead of having their own drinking water system. They may look at consolidation with another one to provide clean drinking water. The residents, the private individuals and the private wells, those are their wells. What we did was we did offer to test their wells for them so that they know what they have in their wells. They then have decisions that they have to make as to what they want to do. They can put on a treatment system on their house to treat the uranium out. They can buy bottled water, and they can also hook up to a rural water system if it's available. But since we don't regulate private drinking water wells, that is, we can provide them the information and then they have to decide what they would like to do. So the state does not have a program in which we provide systems for private individuals on their private wells.
Right. So, but you're okay with the rural water and other municipal water supplies?
Right. That's who we regulate, and to make sure that the drinking water of any resident on those systems has clean water.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have two questions. Let's start with the water piece, because as you were going through, you talked about the water piece. You said there's 350,000 for the drinking water, 269,000. I put watershed, and then I'm assuming the infrastructure bill is that monstrosity federal bill that they just, yeah. So 79.4 million coming in for the Bureau of Water. So what's going to happen with all these different water components? Apparently there's a huge water bill right now to combine all the different water agencies, and I haven't done a deep dive into the bill. So will you all not have much to do with water at that point, or how does that work in terms of this new department they're wanting to?
Okay, well, there's a proposal that the Water Committee has. I forget the bill number. I'm sure Representative Smith knows all about it. And it is to pull the Division of Environment, the Department of Agriculture's Division of Water Resources, the conservation districts, and then the Kansas Water Office into a new agency, because we all deal with water. And I think the idea is to have a one-stop shopping for people that have a water issue, whether it's quantity, quality, planning, structures, it'll all be in one place. Nothing changes day to day. We will still implement the federal rules, the Clean Water Act, the Safe Drinking Water Act. Those are all federal requirements that we implement for EPA. That does not change regardless of whether we're in KDHE or in this new division. So the day-to-day activity, the day-to-day work to be done by our employees will not change.
So what about the funding? Will that water funding shift then into that new water department? Okay.
My understanding of the bill, the programs, the funding, the people all go into this new agency.
So the funding here for the water pieces that you talked about, then those funds, for instance, the 79.4 million from that infrastructure bill then would shift. Okay, thank you for that. Last question is about, on your PowerPoint, your COVID-19 samples. I'm just curious to know why you guys were doing COVID testing when that seems to fit more into the health division of KDHE.
Because we have the Health and Environment Laboratory. The laboratory does both environmental testing and health testing. So that is why the COVID testing ended up under the Division of Environment.
And so did they give you some of their cash? Because they have a few more dollars in their budget than y'all do.
We received adequate funding to do the testing that we needed through the COVID dollars that came down. So.
Okay, thank you.
Representative Gardner.
Just a quick one, Mr. Chairman. Thank you. Leo, we were talking about someone that has their own well, for example, which a number of people do. And so they tested, or I'm glad that you're offering to test those wells for them with the uranium possibilities. But what I was wondering, if they have to go out and their options are, buy additional equipment or hook on or get a connection to a rural water district, and who knows how close they would run. Wouldn't it, you're allocating all this money and have a loan program for municipals. Is it conceivable that you could have a loan program for all these private individuals that need help? Low interest loans to help them connect to a clean water system? Just a question.
So it would take an act of this committee or of this legislator to create that, because currently we have no authority for private drinking water wells. And historically it's been, the committees have liked it that way.
They don't like it.
To be us not being regulated.
I understand not being regulated. I guess I don't understand that if we gave you more authority to create a loan program, which we do, we loan millions and millions of dollars for the Storm Uri last year to municipalities to help pay their gas bills. I just, I think someone needs to take a look if the water quality is that bad or possibly could get that bad to create some kind of fund. I guess I'll just leave it at that.
And we would be willing to sit down and work with you on something like that if you want to go forward with it.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Leo. Always good to see you. So kind of along the questioning of the previous representative, we already have a lot of rural water districts. And I think a lot of these people who have not signed on to those water districts are people who have private wells. I think most of the population has access to a rural water district out in the country. I know I live in the Flint Hills, and boy, we have just spent a lot of money expanding those rural water districts for a lot of people who live out there for a lifestyle, not because they need to. And those private wells cost around $5,000 to drill. And then most of the time they have that water checked. They bring it into your offices and have that checked. I just have a little heartburn on what the real need for that is. I'm just not sure it's there to the level that we might think it is.
Last call.
I do have one.
Representative.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Leo, years ago, we used to have water monitoring, or we were testing mercury. Are we still doing that? It seemed like we stopped.
No, that's an air monitoring program
air.
for the mercury. And we do check mercury in the surface waters also. It's just a common parameter. But I think what you're asking, we set up a mercury monitoring, air monitoring system, and that is still going on.
So
Needless to say, mercury levels have dropped significantly.
have they dropped significantly? And is that the coal issue? Okay, so something we did caused it to drop. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
So, Leo, you've done another great job. So, that'll take care of the presentation, just not quite. We got to hear from, Aaron, you back there? So, I couldn't see you. Just kind of tell them who you are and.
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aaron Popelka with the Kansas Livestock Association. I submitted some testimony to Josh, and hopefully you'll have that in front of you. If you don't, I can get you a copy. Not very often we get to come before a budget committee. On a rare occasion we do. It's because something that's very specific to our industry, and that's what I want to talk to you a little bit about today. I'll kind of latch on to Leo's last piece about employee retention, because that's what a lot of this is about, and a lot about what we're trying to protect here. So just a little bit of review. Within KDHE, there's a livestock waste management section. That is the section that issues all the registrations and permits for confined feeding facilities in the state. Just a little review. Anything over 300 animal units is required to be registered. And if you're at 1,000 head, you have to get a permit. If you're between 300 animal units and 1,000 head, you might have to get a permit if you're a pollution potential, okay? So all those registrations or permits all go through that livestock waste management system. When we make a permit application, those are have to be, under the department's rules, reviewed by engineers. And that's what I want to talk to you about today. You may remember in the Appropriations Committee last year, we had an amendment added. I've attached, and that made it into the final budget bill, House Bill 2007 from last year. I've attached that as attachment A to the testimony. So that is current law now. And essentially what it says is that because, and the reason for that was last year, remember, we were in a different financial situation. At that point, the governor was proposing, I believe it was 10% shrinkage cuts. And part of that is that they were going to reduce the number of engineers in the waste management section. The problem with that is we had just added an engineer a few years prior, about 6 or 7 years ago. We developed a backlog of these permits. We didn't have enough staff to process them. That led to construction delays, permit renewal delays. These things have to be renewed every 5 years, so renewals have to be checked too. And so what we did was we put into the bill that basically they have to maintain their level of engineers, and if they needed more money, then they needed to reduce staffing in other areas, specialists and inspectors. So we'd hope, since we'd raised kind of that profile in the budget bill, that the governor's budget would address this situation. Unfortunately, it hasn't. And so that's why we're here today. I want to talk a little bit about a couple solutions. I like to come with solutions, not just problems, and I have a couple potential solutions for you to think about. So first, I think would be, and I should mention now, because part of the issue we're going into, and this gets to the retention issue, the lead engineer, who's also the administrator for the section, resigned last summer, take another position. I believe it, and the reason was for more pay. And while the departments filled the administrative part of that role, they haven't filled the engineering slot. They currently have it listed, but I know Director Hennings had difficulty filling that. So under this budget proviso, they're under an obligation to try and fill that during this fiscal year, but they've not been able to do that. So that raises the issue of, well, what happens next year when we don't have a proviso and the governor hasn't put extra money in to maintain this? So we want to make sure that position is maintained. So one solution would be to add extra money into the budget. And we put there, so they have it listed for between $54,891 and $71,760, depending on the level of expertise. So the lower levels, an engineer right out of college, upper levels, a professional engineer. Now, K-State has some engineering surveys. K-State Engineering does them. Their range is a little different. K-State range puts starting at 58 and experienced PE at 92. So I know we talked about some studies, but clearly we don't have quite what we need. So one solution was be put in, roughly 90,000. Our organization tends to be fiscally conservative. I know some of you may want to be in that position too. So there's another solution, and that would be, if you look at the back of the testimony, there's attachment B, and that essentially just puts back into the bill, once again, the same language that's in the current budget bill for next fiscal year. And that's essentially, you need to maintain the level of engineers at the fiscal year 21 level, because remember in 22, I said an engineer left, so they have a vacancy. So maintain it at the 21 level, and if you need extra funds, then you need to lay off extra staff. I'm not trying to say those other staff aren't needed or necessary, but for our guys to get the permits done, it's got to be an engineer that reviews it. It can't be a specialist or an inspector. So with that, Mr. Chairman, happy to answer any questions that you or committee members might have.
Go ahead, Representative Gardner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Aaron. You say in your testimony that there's been, because of this opening, that there has been delays, permitting, I believe you say, well, it delays approval of permits, in turn delays construction, increase costs, et cetera. So are you experiencing delays right now?
So when the engineer resigned,
Right.
we did start to build backlog, and Director Henning could probably give you the exact number that we got to. I know he's been able to kind of whittle that down using a contractor, but a contractor is not permanent. And as soon as we, don't have a contractor there, don't have a position, we're fearful this backlog could again start the build as it did when the engineer left.
Okay.
Oh, and I forgot to mention too, we talked to the Senate about this, and there's recommendation of the subcommittee to put it in on the Senate side. So we just ask you, when you work the bill, to either add the money or put in the proviso. Either one's fine with us.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chair, thank you. Are you, is it you that needs it or the agency?
The
Is
agency.
The agency needs it.
I would not come here to ask for money.
Okay,
No.
yeah,
No,
you're
the
just
agency.
recommending.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I guess I could ask the agency, but are there consultants available to work with? So like the nurses are being hired, everybody hiring architects, lawyers, and engineers, and everybody privately as a consultant. Do you have consultants that are doing this work, or is it just not getting done?
So what I mentioned to Representative Gartner is traditionally the departments had their own in-house engineers to do this. And again, engineers have to review the permits under their policies, not the specialist. Because of the opening right now, and Director Henning can correct me if I'm wrong, they're using short-term contractors to fill the void.
That's what I
That's a
meant to say.
short-term Band-Aid.
That's what I meant to say. So the work can be done. We are finding contracted engineers to do the work right now. We just need to hold the position.
Yeah, what we're trying to do here is make sure that they maintain a more permanent employee on staff.
And I understand that. So what's the value of that job? Is there a dollar value?
So I put in my testimony, they have the position listed now, and for a professional engineer, which you have to do some apprenticeship and take a test, they have that level listed at $71,760.
71.
Yeah.
Yeah,
On the
okay.
low end, if you're an associate or a trainee, it's in the mid-50s. Obviously, professional engineers are better.
Professional engineer is what we want.
Yeah,
Oh, okay.
ideally.
Well, so we don't need the 50,000.
Ideally.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question, I have a couple questions for you. How many feedlots with at least 1,000 head capacity do we have in the state?
Oh, boy. I wouldn't know that off the top of my head. Actually, probably Director Henning could probably tell you how many permits there are. Because 1,000 head, if you're over 1,000 head, you're required to have a permit. Leo, do you know that? Yeah. We'd have to, one of us can get you that. We don't know off the top of our head.
So do you know, where's the highest concentration of, I guess then, so where's, we won't go total in the state. Where's the highest concentration of feedlot members then that you have in the state?
Well, I would venture to guess without actually having any data, probably in southwest Kansas. That's where most of the feed yards tend to be. Climate's right there to feed cattle.
So I'm just trying to think of I'm curious to know kind of what our current breakdown is then of, so Southwest Kansas, of course, is home for me. So kind of curious to know what our breakdown of feedlots is, since I know we've been losing so many farmer feeders here in the last few years. So what was do you know how many would have a capacity of 20,000 or more head?
Yeah, and I don't have that. I mean, I'm sure we could probably find it. And let me back up just a second to your other question. If you're talking number of head of cattle, is probably in southwest Kansas. When you get into the permits and registrations, that could move further east because, like I said, as soon as you have confinements over 300 head, that triggers it. So I don't really know the permit breakouts or the operation breakouts, but certainly by head, it's going to be in southwest Kansas.
So if you don't mind, because I know that I'm kind of putting you on the spot here, but if you don't mind kind of giving us a breakdown of the feed yards, like with, and maybe you only have for your membership, which is fine, and maybe you could get us for feedlots in the state, but a breakdown of, you know, how many feedlots are registered with 1,000 head, at least 1,000 head, and then, you know, 5,000 head and the capacity. I'm curious to know how many feedlots we still have left with at least 20,000 or more capacity, actually. I know we have a few out in southwest Kansas, but I haven't heard numbers in the last few years.
If it's okay with you, I'd probably defer that to the department because I would have to do an open
Perfect.
records request to get that because I don't know.
Okay.
I would have to, yeah.
Perfect.
So you can just get it from.
Great. Thank you so much.
Representative?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Aaron, thanks for your testimony there. How old are the numbers that you've got here listed? 57,000, 71,000. Are those numbers 6, 8, 10, 12 months old?
So the numbers for the listing, and Director Henning could probably talk about the listing. That came from their website last week,
Okay.
or whenever we worked the Senate bill. The K-State study came from their website a couple weeks ago.
So, yeah, and I guess my point is, boy, the numbers have certainly gone up really fast, especially on engineers. And, you know, trying to get ahead of that game by the time we get it figured out, we just turn into a training ground and then somebody comes in and recruits them away. So, and being your livestock, I guess we get the honor of, in Morris County, we got a new hog operation that showed up. Is that considered part of Kansas livestock, or are you just beef?
Well, we have all sorts of livestock in our membership, swine, cattle, dairy, but I'm not aware of that. So my guess is that would not be one of our members, but I know another association that might know.
Anyway, thank you.
Aaron, I've got just two questions. Is there a backlog today?
I would probably defer that to Director Henning. He could probably get you the better numbers on that.
So my two questions are this. Is there a backlog today? And how can we fix this so we don't have to do it every year?
I think that, well, the fix every year, I think, is the deeper question, right? On how do we adequately pay employees? I mean, I would venture one thing, and this is a little outside the box, okay? At Department of Ag, they've allowed some employees to go unclassified, right? And that allows more flexibility for the department to pay certain people. I think in this particular engineer spot, if they had the flexibility from the department administration to unclassify the position, they could increase that pay for that individual. But right now, that's not, they have to stay to the state pay scale. So the only way you raise it is do everybody gets 5%. So that's a potential solution that's just kind of Aaron thinking out loud.
That's good, Aaron. So, last call for Aaron. Any questions? You did a great job. Thank you. So, committee, anything you'd like to say?
Yeah, if I could.
Yeah.
Leo, I'd like to ask you a question just along those lines then. Uh, In the testimony from KLA stated that we could do a proviso, or we could just actually add the language in that you would have to maintain that position, possibly by cutting another position, which are already short anyway, so I would hesitate to try to do something like that. But then on the last statement that he made, that we cannot specify a wage for that position, is that correct?
Okay, I'm gonna answer the first question first.
Okay.
How's this? But Leo again, Leo Henning, KDHE, Deputy Secretary. The first part of your question was, say it to me again, because I want to get it exactly right.
That if we put in the language that we have to supply that position, we may have to cut another position within the agency.
And that is the proviso that was put on last year. Things were a little different last year. We had just sustained a 10% reduction of state general funds. The livestock program is mostly funded from the state general fund. So there was a concern that with the reduction, we would have to reduce staff. There's no intention of KDHE to reduce an engineer. We know that we need them. We know we have a permit backlog. We know we have to go out and hire a contractor just to try to stay afloat right now. So we have no intentions whatsoever to reduce an engineering position. So that's why if you want to add the proviso, that's fine. We're not going to do it. We're not going to reduce the engineer anyway. So, but it doesn't fix the problem. What Aaron suggested is that the engineers are in classified positions. None of the positions, I believe, in this section are classified. They've already all been unclassified. The issue is that we are asked as agencies to be consistent across all agencies so that KDHE doesn't pay their engineers more than KDOT pays theirs. And so therefore, that's why I said you need an entire lifting of the entire group instead of just trying to give more money to one engineer in this one spot. Because it's not fair to all the other engineers that are still working there at that 70 per thousand rate to target one and say, okay, we're going to give you 92 because we need you. You know, you see what I'm saying? Because I've got engineers that have been there for years that are at that 72 rate. And to bring in a new one, pay them $20,000 a year more is a fairness issue.
Fair enough. Thank you.
Representative Gardner?
Thinking out of the box, well, not out of the box, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Leo, if we appropriated $90,000, you could go to that engineer that's only making, and I understand equating across the board, but you could go to that engineer that has tenure and say, hey, look what, I've got this job for $85,000. Do you want it? And then you bring in a newer engineer to backfill at 72 or 70,000. I'm just trying to, when I used to be in business, I sort of looked at doing those kinds of things.
So what I would suggest, and maybe it's not a solicited suggestion, so if you want me to be quiet, I shall. But having the money to buy a contractor to continue doing this work over a longer period is more of a Band-Aid that will stop the gap for a while. I will caution that, as Representative Barker noted, the price of engineers are going up. With the bipartisan infrastructure money coming, the contractors where we had some availability of engineers to do this work for us may come to an end. Because we have numerous environmental contractors with engineering departments. And when we put out an RFP for this contractor, we only got 2 respond. And one was for, I believe, $250 an hour. we cannot afford a $250 an hour engineer rate for a company. So we did find one at a more reasonable rate, but it does take money to buy those contractors. So for me, adding money to the budget so that we can continue purchasing this contractor in the short term makes more sense.
Last question.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm just curious, do you think that we in the US, Kansas, do you think we're in a recession?
I'm not an economist. I don't know. It seems like things are getting more expensive, so I see it more the other way, but that's a Leo opinion, not a
Yeah,
KDHE opinion.
I guess just as a closing comment, one of the things that you had said in your testimony, you used the phrase free money, and I guess I would just say that maybe you and I just think about economics differently, but somebody's paying for that somewhere. So anyway, last comment. Thank you.
Leo, thank you for coming. And this will close the hearing on the KDHE environment budget. So get your snow shovels out, and we may see you later. Well, this guy walked to school uphill both ways in snow. Tell him, well, the snow's still snowing.